everyone, I'm Jen and I make useful English lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary ideas and more to help you become a literary expert. So if that sounds exactly like what you need, then make sure you hit the subscribe button below. So in today's video, we are looking at the context of Tennessee Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire, and specifically at how historical, social, and cultural influences in Williams' own time might have shaped his writing of the play. Now, those of you who are seasoned literary students would know that context is important insofar as it illuminates the themes and ideas in the primary text, and should always be viewed as secondary or supplementary to our engagement with the fictional work itself. So by far the most common challenge I hear from students when it comes to context is how and where to incorporate their contextual knowledge in this essay paragraphs, and in a way that's seamless, logical, and insightful. And I've actually done quite a few videos on illustrating this, so you can check them out right here. And in the rest of this video, I will present the play's context in close parallel to specific moments in Streetcar, so hopefully that will show you how we can weave the factual and the fictional elements in an effective and elegant manner when we're writing our essays. So with that, let's dive straight into it. So we know that the play is set in late 1940s New Orleans, which is doubly interesting for its post-World War II timing and its postbellum Southern environment, because they mark a point of turbulence and rupture in 20th century American history. To understand how Williams might have seen this conflux of historical energies, perhaps we can turn to the epigraph by Hart Crane at the start of this play, which begins with, "And so it was I entered the broken world to trace the visionary company of love." Now, while Crane's original poem is largely a personal meditation on his creative and spiritual journey, the broken world he alludes to could be interpreted in Williams's context as a New Orleans, or the broader American South, that's caught in the cusp between the old and new worlds, between a reified past when Confederacy values of racial hierarchy and aristocratic distinctions were the norm, versus an emerging America where cultural diversity, social mobility, and ethnic heterogeneity were quickly gaining ground. This break between past and present then sets the overarching dynamic of Streetcar, which plays out not only in the heavy atmospheric descriptions, but equally in the Dubois-Kowalski power struggle throughout the play. Now, at the start of scene 1, the setting descriptions establish a strong impression of New Orleans as a nexus of contradictions. It is poor but has a raffish charm, the architecture is awash with soft hues like white and tender blue, yet there's an atmosphere of decay. Desires of the body and soul collide with the visceral aroma of bananas and coffee, fused with the dreamy lyricism of piano music. The only conflation that doesn't seem to fit in comfortably is actually the racial one, as suggested by the juxtaposition of the two women, one white and one coloured. Their simultaneous presence in the scene is given an explanation, for New Orleans is a cosmopolitan city where there is a relatively warm and easy intermingling of races in the old part of town, which may seem odd and overcompensatory to a 21st century audience, but probably necessary to Williams's contemporary audience, whose racial consciousness would have largely carried segregationist assumptions and been much less liberal than ours today. So for them, to have a white and black woman appearing in the same setting might have been discomforting, if not even outrageous. Most significantly, though, is that this series of contrast at the start of the play casts the street name Elysian Fields into sharp irony. Elysium means an imaginary utopia, where presumably all people and things align in perfect harmony. The various clashes implied so far about this French Quarter section in New Orleans, however, whether in socioeconomic class, architectural aesthetics, sensorial experience, or racial makeup, suggests that any Elysian state is probably more aspirational and fantastical than achievable and realistic. Indeed, as the play progresses, we see this argument borne out in the characters' remarks about the Quarter and New Orleans, with Blanche making no secret of her dismissive disdain towards the place's lack of refinement, and others like Stella and Mitch accepting the neighborhood's rakishness as part of its charm. When Blanche first arrives at the Kowalski's flat, she is aghast at the rundown nature of her sister's living environs. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you write me, honey? Why didn't you let me know?" "Tell you what, Blanche?" "Why? That you had to live in these conditions." "Aren't you being a little intense about it? It's not that bad at all. New Orleans isn't like other cities." "This has got nothing to do with New Orleans. You might as well say, oh, forgive me, blessed baby. The subject is closed." "Thanks." And during the pause, Blanche stares at her and she smiles back at Blanche. And this is one of the earlier moments which exposes just how far the Dubois sisters have diverged in their values, if they were even that much aligned to begin with, back when they were children, but we don't know that. In fact, they're not even talking about the same thing, as we'll notice. Blanche is fixated on the poverty and roughness of the French Quarter, while Stella sees her environment with a much broader purview. She isn't just some dweller in a dingy flat somewhere in the poorer part of town. She sees herself as a cosmopolitan aspirant in a dynamic, exciting, up-and-coming city representing a new America. Now, Stella's psychology is a bit like how many people would willingly exchange living in a big house in a suburban small town for shacking up in less than ideal flat-sharing arrangements in a place like New York City, San Francisco, or London. Because for Stella, New Orleans isn't like other cities, and it holds the alluring promise of radical self-fashioning, where she can reinvent her identity and shed the stuffy baggage of Southern gentility by marrying someone just as radical and unconventional as Stanley Kowalski. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. But of course, Blanche can't understand this because she desperately wants to hold onto the Southern Belle identity of yore. To her, New Orleans doesn't mean anything, which is why her retort to Stella's protest is that her grievance has nothing to do with New Orleans, but everything to do with her sister's glaring and in some ways for Blanche, hurtful rejection of their rearguard roots as plantation-era aristocrats. This incompatibility in values is conveyed as well through Blanche's blank stare at her sister, who reciprocates with a smile that suggests more kind of quiet defiance than sisterly reassurance. In fact, a large part of Blanche's tragedy is her inability or refusal to accept the generational change symbolized by a place like New Orleans, as we see from her somewhat comical out-of-touch self-consciousness when Mitch invites her for a casual chat on the porch after the first poker night scene. Sit down on the steps and have a cigarette with me. I'm not properly dressed. That don't make no difference in the Quarter. Oh, such a pretty silver case. Now, most people would agree that having a chat over a ciggy on the front steps is a pretty casual activity. But for Blanche, even something as informal as this requires proper dressing, which suggests her pathological need to cover up her true raw self with extra elaborate layers. So Blanche is obviously someone with a lot of clothes, but it's perhaps less a reflection of a passion for fashion, or even a reflection of egoistic vanity, but more of a compulsive, crippling need to hide herself from the changing reality of her environment and the growing problems that her unchanging views about how people or society should be are causing for her. Just as Mitch points out that being properly dressed don't make no difference in the Quarter, so Blanche's non sequitur of a response, such a pretty silver case, alluding to Mitch's locket, indicates that the Quarter's behavioral norms likewise don't make no difference to her. And eventually, it is Blanche's refusal to respect this neighborhood's cultural codes that lead to her expulsion from the space, as in Stella's final decision to send her away to a mental institution. So sexuality is a key theme in Streetcar, especially its manifestations in what would have been deemed more socially deviant forms back in Williams's time, such as promiscuity and homosexuality. And while the play is set in mid-20th century American South, many of the gender values that Blanche subscribed to and is judged by have not really evolved from the antebellum era in the 19th century, when patriarchal men wielded power in both public and private domains, while expecting women to embody Madonna-esque virtues like purity, innocence, and docility. Same-sex relationships were, of course, virtually unheard of or else deemed taboo altogether, and those exposed as homosexuals were sure to become social pariahs for life. The prescription of such strict, unforgiving moral codes on sexual identity meant that the concept of sexuality was often associated with deep shame and unfulfillment. And this applied actually both to those who complied with and defied sexual norms, like Stella and Blanche respectively. One of the most intriguing ironies in the play is how the gender archetypes that Blanche and Stella each embody, in fact, contradict their deeper core identities in relation to their past history and present reality. For example, while Blanche behaves like a morally loose woman, being an escort at the seedy Hotel Flamingo back in Laurel, engaging in sexual relations with a minor, and even after arriving in New Orleans, attempting to flirt with her brother-in-law Stanley and a random young postman, Blanche paradoxically pines for an old South where women were actually held to be impossible exemplars of sexual purity. And in a similar vein, Stella outwardly conforms to the persona of the obedient and forbearing wife, accepting the boatload of physical and emotional abuse from Stanley despite the hurt that his actions cause her. But oddly, her subservient attitude actually jars with the rebellious spirit that would have first motivated Stella to marry an immigrant upstart like Stanley. It's tragically ironic, though, that in seeking to liberate herself from the suffocating gender expectations of her southern roots, Stella comes full circle by seeking another, equally constraining arrangement through marriage, albeit of a different patriarchal flavour. Most importantly, the cognitive dissonance in the Dubois sisters' gender choices and true desires reflect a much more complex internal struggle that many postbellum women would have faced. Caught between the chasm of traditional expectations and nascent gender possibilities, these women, like many others, were desperately looking for ways to understand how they could show up in a changing, chaotic world as unique individuals, rather than as women with a capitalized W who would dutifully perform a set of socio-cultural assumptions about how they should act in and out of the household. This inner conflict is best encapsulated in Blanche's rambling monologue in scene 5, when she tries to gauge if Stella has caught wind of the gossip about her disreputable past in Laurel. I never was hard or self-sufficient enough. When people are soft people have got to court the favour of hard ones, Stella. Have got to be seductive. Put on soft colours, the colours of butterfly wings and flow, and make a little temporary magic just in order to pay for one night's shelter. That's why I've been not so awfully good lately. I've run for protection, Stella, from under one leaky roof to another leaky roof, because it was storm, all storm, and I was caught in the centre. People don't see you. Men don't even admit your existence unless they are making love to you. And you've got to have your existence admitted by someone if you're going to have someone's protection. And so the soft people have got to shimmer and glow, put a paper lantern over the light. But I'm scared now, awfully scared. I don't know how much longer I can turn the trick. It isn't enough to be soft. You've got to be soft and attractive. And I'm fading now. And then the stage directions read, the afternoon has faded to dusk. Stella goes into the bedroom and turns on the light under the paper lantern. She holds a soft drink in her hand. Back to Blanche. Have you been listening to me? I don't listen to you when you are being morbid. So to 21st century audiences like ourselves in feminist, liberal, democratic societies, it may be emotionally challenging to take Blanche's words about needing to be soft and seductive seriously, probably because most of us would have internalized the notion of gender equality and have danced to Destiny Child or Beyoncé's independent women anthems. But this sort of expectation was standard fare back in Blanche's time, as evidenced by the antebellum writer and college president Thomas Roderick Dhu in his unironically titled dissertation on the characteristic differences between the sexes, where he claims that a woman's power is to perfect all those feminine graces, all those fascinating attributes which render her the center of attraction and which delight and charm all those who breathe the atmosphere in which she moves. By her very meekness and beauty does she subdue all around her. The phrases center of attraction, meekness and beauty are echoed in Blanche's belief that a woman must put on soft colours and be both soft and attractive for men to even acknowledge her existence. It's clear then that Blanche's sense of self is wholly contingent upon masculine validation. But the more nuanced point to make here lies in her remark that she's run for protection from one leaky roof to another leaky roof because it was storm, all storm, and I was caught in the center. So going back to our earlier argument about the conflicted nature of Blanche and Stella's gendered behaviour, this image of being caught in the centre between leaky roofs, which represent the perilousness of depending on external sources of protection, is an apt representation of the cultural entrapment suffered by Southern women like the two Dubois sisters. Stella's actions of turning on the light under the paper lantern and her advancing towards her sister with the bottled Coke are pregnant with defiant symbolism. Compared to her damsel in distress of a sister who fears the light and holds tightly onto the past, Stella sees herself as a more liberated one, as the woman who doesn't shy away from the light and takes a forward step towards this new world, new America that's being born. Of course, as we go on to witness the way Stella condones Stanley's transgressions, the self-perception doesn't really quite square with her real, much meeker modes of behaviour, but at least it presents a moment where Stella could be viewed as contemplating a more defiant version of womanhood. So if feminism in the postbellum American South can only be a distant fantasy, at best imagined in subconscious states and at worst impossible in real life, then homosexuality was even more of a social impossibility. With values such as honour, possession, and mastery rooted at the core of antebellum Southern manhood, the very thought of men sexually consorting with other men was unfathomable. First, for his breaking with Christian mores, but perhaps more importantly, accepting homosexuality would have implied a total repudiation of the plantation class structure and master versus slavery dialectic upon which the American Southern society and culture were built. A major source of Blanche's tragic self-sabotage is her discovery and condemnation of her ex-husband Alan's homosexual affair. And while the man's homosexuality itself may be the shock factor here, Williams is perhaps making the point that rather than the sexual orientation itself being the problem, it is the way that people react to homosexuality by attaching such shame and sin to it that causes, ultimately, the greatest form of destruction. As an openly gay man himself, Williams would have felt strongly about the psychological consequences of hiding his own sexual identity, which of course he had to deal with in his earlier years before he came out of the closet. And even afterwards, he faced considerable social stigma for this. So this personal experience translates into the devastating end of Blanche and Alan's marriage. Had Alan not seen the need to hide his true sexuality in the first place, he would not have married Blanche to cover up his homosexuality, hence removing the original source of trauma and tragedy in the play. And despite claiming to have loved her husband, Blanche defaulted to social judgment upon realizing Alan's true sexual orientation, and rather than showing him the sort of compassionate tenderness that she herself so craves, and later ironically purports to possess herself, as she reveals to Mitch in scene 6. I didn't find out anything till after our marriage when we'd run away and come back, and all I knew was I'd failed him in some mysterious way and wasn't able to give him the help he needed, but couldn't speak of. He was in the quicksands and clutching at me, but I wasn't holding him out, I was slipping in with him. I didn't know that. I didn't know anything except I loved him unendurably, but without being able to help him or help myself. Then I found out, in the worst of all possible ways, by coming suddenly into a room that I thought was empty, which wasn't empty, but had 2 people in it. Notice that the diction Blanche chooses, in the quicksands, slipping in, indicate a downward falling movement, implying that she perceives Alan's gayness as a mark of fallenness and sin. The adverb unendurably when she says she loved him unendurably is baffling, if not almost a Freudian slip, because if taken literally, she's saying that her love for him was intolerable to begin with, even before she had found out about his homosexuality. As the moment continues, the entrance and fusion of locomotive noise and polka music complicate the contextual landscape as a dynamic chaos of sound and fury, confusing the sight and mind of its players about what is right and wrong, as we see from the stage directions. A locomotive is heard approaching outside. She claps her hand to her ears and crouches over. The headlight of the locomotive glares into the room and thunders past. As the noise recedes, she straightens slowly and continues speaking. And then she continues, "Afterwards, we pretended that nothing had been discovered. Yes, the 3 of us drove out to Moon Lake Casino, very drunk and laughing all the way." And then there's polka music sounds in a minor key faint with distance. "We danced the Varsoviana. Suddenly in the middle of the dance, the boy I had married broke away from me and ran out of the casino. A few moments later, A shot! The polka stops abruptly. Blanche rises stiffly. Then the polka resumes in a major key. Now, after this moment, Blanche reveals the ghastly climax of the anecdote, which is the moment when she witnesses Alan's having stuck the revolver into his mouth and fired with the back of his head blown away. A key element to focus on about this moment in relation to the idea of hiding one's true self is the motif of the Varsoviana tune. Traditionally, the Varsoviana was known to be a Polish waltz, but later in the 19th century, it suffered a decline in popularity because of its supposed rhythmic vulgarization. So perhaps there's something about the nature of this musical genre that's echoed in Blanche's trajectory, as someone whose original associations were of sophistication, only to then have descended into moral vulgarity as a result of making unsound life choices. Note that this is also the first time this polka music appears. Previously, any musical accompaniment in this play has always been the blue jazz piano melody, and this Varsoviana polka music later recurs towards the end of the play, when Stanley tells Blanche to leave the French Quarter, and as well close to the moment of Stanley's rape of her. Specifically, when at the start of scene 9, the stage directions tell us that the rapid, feverish polka tune, the Varsoviana, is heard, which forebodes the state of frenzied violence that will soon take place in the Kowalski's bedroom. Coupling the first appearance and the later recurrence of the Varsoviana, we can interpret this polka music as being symbolic of the inevitable resurfacing of traumatic memories, which will always return to haunt the individual if left unresolved. And there you go, guys, the historical, social, and cultural context of Streetcar. I hope you found my video comprehensive and useful, especially in my attempts at illustrating how we can weave those contextual points into our textual analysis seamlessly. For your next video then, I recommend that you watch my analysis on the theme of love in Streetcar, where I do a deep dive into the main characters, Blanche, Stanley, Stella, and Mitch. Hit that thumbs up button below if you found this video helpful in any way, so that the YouTube algorithm will know to spread it to other passionate lit learners like yourself all around the world, and that you can encourage me to keep making these useful study videos for you. So please subscribe if you haven't already and switch on that bell notification so that you never miss out on my future weekly videos. Finally, you can consider joining my membership program for exclusive video requests and essay review perks. You can check that out by clicking the join button right below. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye!